Hello, church. Thank you for joining me today. We're starting a new series, and we've entitled it On His Mind. We're going to walk through some of the important connections Jesus had in the weeks leading up to his death. Now, he knew he was going to be crucified on the cross. What would you do if you had 7 days to live? Well, he chose to raise Lazarus from the dead, and he paused to have dinner with Zacchaeus. He sat as Mary anointed him with oil in preparation for his burial. Those around Jesus were on his mind. He was purposeful in his short time left here on earth. What if we lived as purposeful with our connections as Jesus did? Do you know that God thinks about you a lot? You are on his mind. It's true. You are on God's mind. Psalm 139:17. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. The God who created everything and placed every star in the sky actually has you on his mind. In fact, he has all humanity on his mind. And he let Daniel in on his plans. Let's just finish up with Daniel chapter 9, 20 to 23. I went on praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people, pleading with the Lord my God for Jerusalem, his holy mountain. As I was praying, Gabriel, whom I had seen in earlier vision, came swiftly to me at the time of the evening sacrifice. He explained to me, Daniel, I have come here to give you insight and understanding. The moment you began praying, a command was given, and now I am here to tell you what it was. For you are very precious to God. Listen carefully so that you can understand the meaning of your vision. I know we talked about this last week, but God hears prayers, and Daniel's prayers were answered. Looking at Daniel's vision, we will see some of it come about in Luke chapter 19 as Jesus enters Jerusalem, that triumphal entry. But first, let's look at the vision. In Daniel 9, 24 through 27, those verses, they're some of the most important prophetic sections in the Bible. It tells us that God has put Israel's future on a clock. Now, you're probably wondering why we're still in Daniel when we're talking about Jesus' last week on earth. Well, this vision has a lot to do with Jesus' first coming and his crucifixion. Daniel chapter 9, 24 through 27. A period of 70 sets of 7 has been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish their rebellion, to put an end to their sin, to atone for their guilt, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to confirm the prophetic vision, and to anoint the most holy place. Now listen and understand. 7 sets of 7 plus 62 sets of 7 will pass from the time the command is given to rebuild Jerusalem until a ruler, the anointed one, comes. Jerusalem will be rebuilt with streets and strong defenses, despite the perilous times. After this period of 62 sets of 7, the anointed one will be killed, appearing to have accomplished nothing. And a ruler will arise, whose armies will destroy the city and the temple. The end will come with a flood and war, and its miseries are decreed from that time to the very end. The ruler will make a treaty with the people for a period of 1 set of 7. But after half this time, he will put an end to the sacrifices and offerings. And as a climax to all his terrible deeds, he will set up a sacrilegious object that causes desecration until the fate decreed for this defiler is finally poured out on him. Visions. You gotta love them. So to help us better understand this passage, its accuracy and its significance, let's break it down. It's all about weeks of years. The term week or set of 7 refers to periods or sets of 7 years. The entire amount of time in view here is a period of 490 years. 70 sets of 7 years, using a 365-day year. The 490 years have to do with the Jewish people and the city of Jerusalem, not the church. The angel Gabriel told Daniel this time period is for your people Israel, and your holy city, Jerusalem. And that was in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. The purpose of the 70 weeks. Once again, in verse 24 of Daniel chapter 9, it tells us the purpose of these 490 years is to accomplish 6 goals. Now, the first 3 have to do with man's sin, and the last 3 have to do with God's righteousness. The first one, to finish the transgression or rebellion, to make an end of sin. And then the third one, to make atonement for iniquity, which is guilt. 4, to bring an everlasting righteousness. 5, to seal up visions and prophecies. And then the last one, to anoint the most holy place. As I alluded to, Jesus' death on the cross at his first coming fulfilled the first 3 of these purposes. But Israel's application of the significance of his death in the Messiah coming will not be realized until the people repent at the end of the 70 years, the nation of Israel coming back to him. When the clock starts ticking, the clock for these 70 weeks or 490 year period begin ticking, and we actually know the date, March 5th, 444 BC. That's when the Persian king Artaxerxes issued a decree allowing the Jews to return under Nehemiah's leadership to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, not just the temple, but the whole city. And that's found in Nehemiah chapter 2. The first 69 weeks, from the time the countdown began until the coming of the Messiah, will be 69 sets of 7, or 483 years. This exact period of time, which is actually 173,880 days, is the precise number of days that elapsed from March 5th, 444 BC, until March 30th, AD 33, the day Jesus rode into Jerusalem for his triumphal entry, recorded in Luke 19. That's what we're going to be looking at. And then there's this gap of grace. When Israel rejected Jesus Christ as their Messiah, God temporarily suspends his plan for Israel because the timing is all about Israel. There's a gap of an unspecified time between the 69th and the 70th set of 7. It's where the church is, the age of grace, Antichrist, treaty, and the final 7 years. God's clock for Israel will begin to run again after the church had been raptured, taken to heaven, and that's talked about in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. That's when the Antichrist will come onto the scene and make a 7-year covenant or treaty with Israel. And that's talked about in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. Then the Antichrist breaks the treaty. In one of the greatest double crosses of all time, the Antichrist will break the covenant with Israel at its midpoint, 3.5 years in, and set up an abominable, sacrilegious image of himself in the rebuilt temple of God in Jerusalem, right there on the altar. Now that's also talked about in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21, Revelation 13, 14, and 15. At the end of the 70th set of 7 years, God will slay the Antichrist, once again referred to in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. This will mark the end of the 70 sets of 7. And then that actually ushers in the beginning of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. You see, it's not that difficult to understand when you take the Bible at its word. History is laid out for all to see. Really, it's his story, Jesus' story, and we get to be part of it. So let's look at Luke 19. In our timeline, it's almost at the end of the 69th week. Luke 19, verses 1 through 4. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. I love the story of Zacchaeus. There's so many great lessons in this. The truth is, if you want God to change your life, He can and will. Zacchaeus knew what he was. He knew what people thought about him. But he wanted to see Jesus. That was the big thing. I want to go see him. I don't know if he wanted to be changed that day, but he was. Now, what can we learn from Zacchaeus' experience? Lesson number 1, put your pride aside. It would have had to be a humbling experience to be so small that you had to climb a tree to see Jesus. Now, people already didn't like him. There wouldn't have been any love lost to see this little fellow push to the back of the crowd. But he didn't let that stop him. He wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to have an interaction with Jesus just by looking at him. Jesus knew his time was coming to an end on earth, yet he's still calling out to people, calling them to himself. Luke chapter 19, verse 5. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Jesus knew Zacchaeus' name. His name actually means pure or innocent. Now, he wasn't really living up to his name, but that didn't stop Jesus from calling him out. Now, that brings us to lesson number 2. Answer his call. Be willing to accept and answer the call. Be like Zacchaeus. Luke 19, 6 and 7. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house, to great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. While the crowds were grumbling, Jesus was welcoming. Jesus welcomes those who want to see him. Zacchaeus wanted to see him. There's no instance anywhere in the scripture that anyone who sought after Jesus wasn't welcomed by him. Jesus knew Zacchaeus mattered, and we matter also. When Zacchaeus saw that Jesus that knew him, he changed. We are valuable, and Jesus invites us to find out just how much. Let him find you and change you. Whenever you have an encounter with Jesus, you will be changed. Just like if you have an encounter with high voltage, you will be changed. Luke chapter 19, verses 8 through 10. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give back 4 times as much. Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. There you have it, 3 simple lessons from the life of Zacchaeus. They worked for him and they will work for you also. Zacchaeus was lost until he found Jesus, who had been looking for him all along. Understand this. In all of the study we can do about prophecies and end-time events, what the future holds, Jesus knows your name, just like he knew Zacchaeus' name. Don't miss this point. Jesus sees you even before you seek him. He welcomes you and saves you. Jesus wants to be with you. You are on his mind. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God? They cannot be numbered.